Really? You know what I love about this? It feels genuinely like it's just you and me, which I love.
It's genuinely just you and me, you know. And yes, it's yeah, God, The Lion King again. You know,
Yeah.
I thought we'd done that one before, but there you go. You know, things
Well,
a new generation.
a new generation and look, on the one hand, it's fabulous ASCAP, acknowledging the box office success, and that's a good thing. A big movie for us all, for Disney Studios, for you. The completion, no doubt, of a journey. But listen, I'm thinking about The Lion King.
Wait, let me just say this because you just remind me of something. Um, Thank God for ASCAP, and I'll tell you why. Because I've never written a note of music for money. You know, Lion King I wrote for my daughter Zoe, you know, and so thank God thank God ASCAP exists that looks after idiots like me who just want to go and make music. Um, and thank God for idiots like you who support me in this and let me do all these crazy things. Thank you.
Well, listen, it's my pleasure, and thank you, ASCAP, for the honor, and thank you for honoring me with this quality amount of time to discuss with Hans his career, a little bit of Lion King, a lot of things about filmmakers, maybe even some personal stuff. It's really an opportunity for me to have a conversation with Hans that we never seem to have long enough to do. So I know we have a limited amount of time, and so let me just kind of jump into it, Hans. I'm going to kind of lead you, and I want you to do a lot of talking because I'm known for doing way too much talking. Your IMDb says 214 films you've scored, which is just amazing. We're not going to touch on them all. What I want to do is let's start from the beginning. Can we start from the beginning? You're German. You're half Jewish. Your mom was a musician. Dad's an engineer. How did your family influence you? Your parents? Where did music first touch your life? Where did it first happen?
My mom. You know, listen, my mom took me to my first opera when I was 2.5 years old. And my mom was really serious about classical music, and so we would go to classical concerts every week. And I met Scholti and Rubinstein and all the greats, the Karajan's of this world, etc. But my dad, who was an engineer, played really appalling, shitty jazz clarinet. And as a little kid, he'd have his feet up on his desk. I'd be sitting on the floor, drumming on, ashtrays and stuff like this. And he'd be riffing on the clarinet. And he taught me that music is about playfulness. Music is about joy. Music is about this. But I could never actually say that. It's because, my mom saw it as a very serious and honorable profession. But to this day, I'm still torn between the two. And I think I'm not torn between the two. I think both are valid. But what really got me into music was just that playfulness, just having fun, having a laugh, and the whole thing that you're playing with people, something that is becoming at this very moment very, very difficult. And I really miss it. I mean so that's how I got into it.
Yeah, it's impossible. I often wondered, you talk about your things you were exposed to and influences along the way in your life. I know with songwriters who get the extra leg of lyric that can be brought into it, and some of the greatest songwriters of all time have been social commentators of what's going on around them. As a composer, as an underscore instrumentalist, do you bring experience? Do you bring that to your composition and your production?
Yes, I think I do because I grew up with, being German. I grew up with a lot of fairy tales, which might sound crazy, but and I grew up, with a lot of psychology. And there's a famous psychologist, Bruno Bettelheim, who wrote a book called The Uses of Enchantment, and it's really about how fairy tales influence us. I always think it's absolutely the Bible for storytelling in film, because I think film became the myth of the 20th century. It became the great 20th century art form, and so I always get at everything from either a psychological point of view or the underlying mythological point of view. So I never learned how to be a good musician. I think I've become a relatively good collaborator in the storytelling.
Kind of to that point, you would say you are a self-taught musician. Okay, you would say that you have
I'm a not taught musician.
not taught musician, minimal, what we would think is typical music lessons. Listen, me too. I'm self-taught and I stink. I've worked with you. I see you at the board. I see you writing full knowledge of music theory and arrangement and orchestration. And how do you go from self-taught to actually being a master at composition?
Okay, well, look. I'll give you a really simple explanation. When we speak, you and I, as at this very moment, I think you will detect a slight German accent still in there. Because I learned English at I don't know, when did I go to England? When I was 15, 16, something like that, going to school. But music, the accent of music, the listening into the orchestra, listening, I did literally from 2 years old. So I think I learned an enormous amount of just being immersed in orchestral music every week, And if we didn't go to the symphony, we'd have people come to, quartet would come to the house and play. There was always music around me. And I think you just learn the accent, you learn the insight of how it all works. And I mean, it actually came in really handy in Interstellar. I mean, just down the road from us lived a man who um, he restored cathedrals. And one of the things he'd done in his house was he somehow managed to persuade a church to let go of its church organ. He lived in an old medieval tower, and he ripped out all the floors and put a 2,500 pipe church organ in there. I, as a kid, was always allowed to go and jam on this thing, and I remember sort of the victory of being tall enough that my feet now from the stool could actually reach the pedals. But making those, making huge, in a way, orchestral noises. I mean, I wouldn't call it music; it was noise. And this man was fabulous because everybody else thought it was horrible, and he encouraged me. And so I had a lot of. I had a weird beginning because there were people who encouraged me, and at the same time, music was a real refuge for me. I mean, look, my dad died when I was 6 years old, and so music sort of became a refuge for me, and it became my best friend.
Do you have memories of your father?
Of course I do. Of course I do. I mean, back to Lion King. Lion King is my way of saying goodbye to my dad. Lion King, which I took it on out of all the wrong reasons. I took it on because I wanted to. My daughter Zoe was 6 at the time. I wanted to take her to a premiere, and I wanted to show off. Because I had to show off, and that's why I took the job. And then I sat in front of it, and I suddenly realized, it wasn't just a movie about fuzzy animals. It was about how do you deal with the death of a father? And I wrote something quite solemn and quite serious, and it was really quite something that we got away with it. We were allowed to do these things.
Well, cathartic.
We were allowed to write something. Yeah, we did do it. We did get into the Timon and Pumbaa bit a bit later on, and fart jokes and all this, but for a while it was very cathartic.
Yeah, I can only imagine. When you first started picking up instruments, because I want to jump ahead to. So now you're playing keyboards, you're banging around London. Now in your teens, you're in bands and such. Of course, it's synonymous with you in some respects. The Buggles, Video Killed the Radio Star, little clips of you in that iconic music video that actually started the entire music video industry. That's also Trevor Horn. Tell me about the Buggles. Tell me about how you found yourself in that, because you guys at that moment had a giant hit.
Well, hang on. It was really Trevor and Jeff Downs' band, and they needed a synth guy, and I was the synth guy. You know, maybe because my dad was an engineer, I figured out at a certain point that you could subvert computers and turn them into musical instruments or some, synthesizers and all that sort of stuff. So I was seriously into electronics and seriously into electronic music. And Jeff and Trevor, we actually started, it wasn't the Buggles at all, it was a disco album we were making, but that's a whole story. Other than that, I was a synth programmer. I wasn't a good player. Jeff was a great player. And so, but Trevor had this idea. Trevor had Video Killed the Radio Star. And it seemed, and again, if you think about it, it's not a love song. It's a movie. It's a story. It's a something. And we couldn't give this thing away, and somehow or the other, we managed to get it done, and we managed to raise the money to shoot this video. Which instantly got banned by the BBC because we're blowing up a television in it. But fate would have it, 2 years after this thing was not a hit, something called MTV came along, and we were the first video on MTV.
And how appropriate, Video Killed the Radio Star for the debut of MTV.
So no, because we felt it. That was the thing. We knew this thing was coming. I mean, we knew it was all going to be different. It was all going to change. We knew that. We sort of thought that the invention of recorded music without images was actually a mistake. That buying a CD or buying a record without seeing the performance was only half the music.
Yeah, well,
and partly why I got into film was because I felt, okay, I'm going to say it, and I probably will never work in this town again. I always felt film was there to complete my music. The images were there to complete the music. So I was recklessly using these directors like Terrence Malick and, Ridley Scott. I mean, the great visualists, Tony Scott. Tony offered me my first movie.
And that was to complete, and that completed, that's interesting how it completed your musical vision by having the visual. Okay, so I don't want to get too far ahead. So you talked about synthesizers. I look at the 70s into the 80s is when the electric guitars got turned off and the synthesizers got turned on. So you're now synth programming, you're playing keyboards, and you're knocking around, and Stanley Myers. Okay, now Stanley Myers, you scored a number of films with him. I also want to ask you about Ludus Tonalis. Okay, tell me about Stanley and those first films, because that's where it started.
Actually, it all goes back to a woman called Maggie Rodford, who you probably know.
Yeah.
I was knocking around in a band, no record deal, no money, had a little synth, and Maggie worked for George Martin. She had a company with George Martin, and she needed a synth programmer. And a recording engineer gave her my name, and she said, "What are you doing on Monday?" And I came in, did my little session, and actually to this day, I can't remember what the session was, but I do remember. I have an absolute image of the check still and her very tidy signature. 35 pounds only, which was the first time I actually earned some money. And because it was a George Martin owned company, I started to work with George, and I learned a lot of stuff from George.
Wow.
And one of the people in this George and Maggie world was Stanley Myers, who, no, I mean, and I'd done a couple of sessions for Stanley, and it would always be the same thing. He had terrible handwriting, and I couldn't read music anyway. So he'd like plonk a piece of paper in front of me that I wasn't going to read, and so I just made stuff up. And he never said anything about me making stuff up. He never said no. And then I remember one day I got a phone call from him, and it was literally, he said, "Hey, do you want to do a movie with me?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Good," and hung up. And that was, and I sort of became Stanley's assistant and intern, because I knew about technology, and he had bought a very expensive and incredibly complicated espresso machine. And so I was working the espresso machine, and he was teaching me about the orchestra. And it sounds like a joke, but it's the truth. I would ask Stanley, what's a ritardando, what's all that stuff, and I would be at all those sessions.
So it's part of your self-teaching, though being mentored of sorts.
Yeah, and and working with great engineers. I mean, it's I mean, Jeff Emmerich, Steve Lipton, all those, and one of the things I figured out very early on was I never wanted to be at the mercy of a recording engineer. You didn't want to say to a guy, can you make it sound more blue? I mean, because that's stupid. Right?
That's my line.
Right. So I wanted to know how the technology worked, and I wanted to be able to go up to the mixing console and, make it sound more blue. I know how to do that, etc.
So part of the growth. So with Stanley, you did a bunch of films, and I think your first solo credit was Terminal Exposure.
Oh no! Shit! Yeah, we did a load of. Oh man, we did.
Wait, but you don't have to dwell on that because listen. Here's the thing: you have all these unforgettable films: Terminal Exposure, Taffin, the Fruit Machine, Nightmare at Noon, Burning Secrets. But then there's this little gem, Chris Menge's A World Apart.
Hang on, you need to mention one other movie in this lot because it was so important. My Beautiful Laundress.
Oh, yeah, right.
Daniel Day-Lewis, and I think it was the first gay interracial kiss on in film or on a screen, and I remember loving sitting in the audience. And because it comes sort of out of the blue, and when that happens, you're just hearing the collective jaw of a whole nation drop. So I thought that was rather good, and there was a lot of work with Working Title, who had just started. So Working Title started films. Stanley and I were sort of the guys, who we were all friends. None of us really knew how to make movies. World Apart is another one of those. Chris Menge was, who'd won 2 Oscars as a DP. I mean, he was the DP on The Mission, the DP on The Killing.
DP, yeah.
Amazing guy, and we decided to make this movie in Africa. The money fell through on the first day of shooting, and Sarah Radcliffe, the producer, basically paid for these huge crowd scenes on her American Express card, which totally wasn't covered, and we were just all holding our breath. Can Tim back in London see if he can find a new deal for us? But I mean, everything we were doing was by the seat of our pants.
Was right. So you do these films. You have this jam A World Apart. And then more forgettable films, but then out of nowhere, seemingly, as I'm looking through your filmography, out of nowhere, Rain Man. How did that even happen?
Let me be very precise about that. A World Apart. So this is all in 1 year. Actually, in that year, I did 14 projects. So World Apart. Diana Levinson, Barry Levinson's wife, went to see A World Apart, and she really liked it. She really liked the music, and she could have just gone to Barry and said, "Hey, I just saw this movie and I really liked the music." But that's not what she did. She went out and bought him the CD. And Barry was in London promoting Good Morning Vietnam.
Our film, yeah.
And he was working on Rain Man, right? So somebody had given him the address for my little studio, which was down a dark and really, I mean, like a dodgy alley in the middle of Fulham, not a neighborhood you really wanted to frequent in those days. And it's about 11 o'clock at night, and there's a knock on the door, and I open the door, and this guy's standing there, and he's going, "Hi, my name is Barry Levinson." I sort of look at him blankly, and he goes, "I'm a director." And I was going, "Yeah, you and my mom both," right? But I looked behind him, and shoved down this tiny alley were two enormous limousines, which is not a common sight in Fulham. I thought, oh, maybe he is. Maybe I should ask him in. So he came in, and he, and I, and I showed him what I was doing, and we started having this conversation. He started to talk to me about this movie, Rain Man, and he didn't have a script or anything, but he really liked the music I had done for A World Apart, and he said, would I consider, this was the good bit, would I consider coming to Hollywood? And he told me later he was actually really worried that I was going to say no, and that I was only interested in doing art movies. Little did he know about terminal exposure. So I got onto a plane. I got onto a plane with Big Al, my recording engineer, Al Clay, my buddy, and we arrived in Los Angeles. We didn't know anybody, and so I had my synth, and we set it up in Barry's office, which is where his cutting room was, and we did the whole score for Rain Man in Barry's office.
Fabulous.
And
so it's all synth. It's all.
There was a sax player. We went to Paramount to record a sax player and a singer. Wow. And I remember saying to Mark Johnson, the producer, can we afford to do that? Because here I am. I came from English indie movies, and to actually hire a musician was a risque proposition as far as the budget was concerned. And I remember Mark looking at me and going, "Ooh, we're getting a little close to the edge here," But Barry wanted a sax player, so we did that. And years later, Mark told me, they budgeted for a huge symphony orchestra, which of course we never used. So it's a lonely sax player.
Well, that project turned out pretty good, and I mean, to answer a question actually that just got lofted from someone in who's watching. Asking about, when did your artistic career really begin to take off in a sense of momentum? What I see when I look at your credits, and I see what happened after the Rain Man, the films got bigger budgets, bigger stars, Twister, Black Rain, which is where you started with Ridley, that leads to other things. Did you feel a sense of momentum at that point in time? It wins Best Picture.
Quite the opposite. While I was doing Rain Man, I was trying to finish a BBC miniseries. Actually, the editor on it is an editor I'm working with right now, Joe Walker, who's actually he's as much of a great musician as he's an editor. And I had gone £278 over budget on this BBC thing, which was like, I promise you, it was a miniseries. It had more music in it than anything ever. And I'd gone £278 over budget, and I was told I will never work for the BBC again. So I only had one choice. I better make that thing in Hollywood work, right? And so so then I met Ridley, who I sort of knew from London, and the advertising world. And I met the Zanucks who were doing Driving Miss Daisy. So I did Black Rain and Driving Miss Daisy actually in the same month. I can't remember what we did after that, but
that's the next film. I remember that was the next film I wanted to ask you about was, in fact, Driving Miss Daisy, because it is such a commercial riff. I know you're sitting there at your keyboard. Do you remember the riff?
Oh God, bloody hell! Yes, I do. Etc.
Listen, man, that to me, looking at the body and material that came before that, driving Miss Daisy, all of a sudden, that riff, that melody, the commercial feel to it, this good feeling feel to it, the payoff of the dynamic growth of that. Where did that come from?
Wait, hang on a second. Because I just played you the chorus. But the part I didn't play you is the whole thing is there's a sequencer running all the way through it.
Holding it together.
Driving with Daisy is 100% electronica. It's just, now that I tell you, next time you listen to it.
It's 100. Played on what? Played on what?
Well, the whole thing was, obviously, there wasn't a single musician on Driving with Daisy.
Right.
But the whole thing is based around this one little sequence that's just going, because I kept looking at Jessica Tandy's performance and just the way her feet worked. And Lily Sarek said something very smart to me. She said, don't write old people music. Old people don't feel old. We start putting these big orchestral things onto them, and that's what makes them old. That's what makes them tired. So I thought, no, I'm going to go and write a electronica.
What a beauty! What a beauty! That Driving Miss Daisy is also, because strangely I worked on it remotely, but that was when I first met Jay Rifkin. Tell me some good things about Jay, the beginning of Media Ventures, and was Media Ventures the seeds of what would remote control become?
Well, Jay had gone to university in England, and we had a little studio together in Brighton, south of England. Brighton was, not what it is now. Now it's a real, center of music, but it really wasn't then. And Jay and I were, we were school friends, and he was a really good recording engineer, and it's just, look, that was the beginning of Media Ventures. We found a building. I'm trying to make it short, but we eventually found a building in Santa Monica, an old warehouse, and everybody was saying we were wrong. If you want to be in Hollywood, you need to be in Hollywood. And I was going, no, I want to be by the sea. I want to, and Santa Monica being really cool. So we got this building and sort of, started working from there. And then I remember Jerry Bruckheimer came down.
Right.
Going, oh, this is really cool. Do you think there are any more? And I'm going, I don't know. So he moved just down the road. Then James Newton Howard moved just around the corner. Now J.J. Abrams is there.
Everybody's gravitating towards there on the west side. Yeah. So, yeah, that's fantastic. All right, let's talk about the 90s. Let's move into the 90s. We're leaving the 80s behind. The 90s, kind of for you, kicks off with Days of Thunder. It's the beginning of your relationship, I think.
Yeah.
Is Days of Thunder your first Tony film, first Bruckheimer film, second Tom Cruise movie?
Well, second Tom Cruise film. Tony actually asked me to work on another film before that. And when I was still in London, and his producer basically went, Hans who? So I didn't get the job, broke my heart. Week later, I got Rain Man. Right? So Tony's, then I'm working with Tony's brother, Ridley. So Tony is sort of miffed because he's really the one who's discovered me, right? So I get this phone call from Jerry Bruckheimer, Don Simpson. Will I come down to Daytona where they're shooting this movie for a meeting? I go down to Daytona for an afternoon to have this meeting. And to cut a long story short, they basically work out that they're so behind in their shoot that if I leave, if I don't start writing now, we're never going to make the deadline. And I'm saying, but hang on, we don't have a studio. And they go, don't worry about a studio. And this guy comes in, one of the set builders, and he's going, what do you want? And I'm going, well, like about this and that, I'm going, but all I have with me is a T-shirt. And Susan Becker, the costume designer, comes in and she goes, listen, I'm just sending out for some suits for Tom. What would you like? I'm going, oh, all right. So I ended up in Daytona for 3 months. I had this crazy idea of getting Jeff Beck down to work with me. At first, like the stunt guys who are like real men as opposed to me, weaselly little composer. They wouldn't give me the time of day. Then Jeff Beck comes down. Suddenly, I'm like the coolest,
most popular guy.
Popular guy. Stunts Unlimited, hats and jackets, and they taught me how to drive because I didn't know how to drive. But I never needed to drive and run. Who cares? So to this day, I can still drive very fast going left because they taught me in one of those cars.
Well, let's talk about Bruckheimer. Jerry, a defining force in your life. So many movies, including our Pirates franchise. Huge success. Jerry's very demanding. He's big on being temp to score. Is can make you crazy. But boy, you can't argue with the result. And he knows a tune. What would you say about Jerry?
Here's the thing that I'm really going to say about Jerry. He's probably one of the best friends you can have. Really, honestly. He is singular, and look. I'm cracking all these jokes or whatever about going down to Daytona. All this. This was a big movie. This was terrifying for me. I used to have these really bad anxiety attacks, just sitting there going, "Oh my God, how am I going to write this?" Well, I have no idea about cars, other than going left. So Jerry knew that. Jerry felt it, and Jerry would just come and sit with me and just be my friend. And literally, just now, with the virus. I got caught in the virus.
Yeah.
Jerry phoned every day. Jerry was there every day, seeing how I was feeling. And I was supposed to do a movie for Jerry, and Jerry actually goes, "No, forget the movie. You just need to rest." And we've been through a lot. We've done a lot together, and yeah, it worked out. That Pirates thing worked out. That wasn't so bad,
It has definitely worked out. I'm going to deviate a little bit from the years to some of the filmmakers because our time is booming by. Backdraft, your first film with Ron Howard, that began a long relationship. And Ron Howard also, and it's something I wanted to ask about, Ron Howard also had a lot of great successes with James Horner. So you forged your own relationship with Ron. He also lost James Horner. Is there a dynamic when you're feeling no one can replace James Horner? Is there a challenge when you are stepping into someone else's place of sorts?
Never really thought about it because the way Ron and I work. Let me give you. Here's a good example. Frost Nixon, tiny little movie, about a certain moment in time, and Kathy Nelson, music supervisor, Ron, and I. We were supposed to meet about songs, so we met about songs for 2 weeks. We never talked about songs. We just talked about score. We just talked about story. We just talked about shots. We talked about how difficult it was to take Peter Morgan's brilliant play and make it cinematic. And and Ron would ask questions, or and I'd go, if you give me a shot like this, I can do something like that, and then it would be like a delight when a shot would come in that was really shot for the music to do something with. So no, we always had this sort of autonomous relationship, and I literally, an hour ago, I finished a meeting with Ron on the movie we're working on.
Well, it's no doubt a long, satisfying relationship. You've done so many wonderful, wonderful films with him. Let's talk about, again, I'm kind of deviating a little bit, but Jeffrey Katzenberg, never heard of him. More big influences in your life. Obviously, had to do with you doing The Lion King, which I think was your first animated film, but then that evolved into the DreamWorks relationship, and you as head of music for an animation studio.
I had your job.
Yeah, right. Go.
Treat me with some respect.
Tell me about Jeffrey. What made Jeffrey run?
No. What happened was that what happened? I had done this film for Peter Weir, and Jeffrey really liked what I did. And actually, this is a good story. And it's the 21st of December. And I'm in London, and the phone rings, and somebody says, "It's Jeffrey Katzenberg. Will you take the call?" I'm going, "Sure, I'll take the call." And he says, "Will I look at a movie for him?" I'm going, "Sure, I'll look at a movie for you." He goes, "Good, because Chris Montan, your old partner in crime, on his way to the airport to show me this movie." And I'm going, "Hang on a second. When does this movie need to be done by?" And he goes, 6th of January. And it's the 21st of December, and we have Christmas, and fine, we're not going to have Christmas. And I remember at 1:45 on the 31st of January, the tape machine died, but I managed to find one not drunk technician who could fix the tape machine. But that was really my start with Jeffrey, I never told him that I was sick as a dog after finishing that movie, because there just wasn't any sleep or anything. God, how much should I tell you? I got Chris into smoking cigarettes, which I never forgave me for. Took him years to get over that movie.
But look what it started. Look where it led, not only at Disney, but listen, I got to bring this up. The original animated Lion King, bam, you win an Oscar. Not only do you win the Oscar, but that score is awarded over, and you know this, Alan Silvestri's Forrest Gump, Tom Newman's Shawshank Redemption, Elliot Goldenthal's Interview with a Vampire. Any sense of what you guys were in the midst of creating when you did it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and I tell you this: if I could do it, if I could do that night over again, I would absolutely give Tom the Oscar for Shawshank Redemption, because I think that is the one that echoes in eternity. That's the one that truly influenced everything beyond that moment. I mean, I thought that was a revolutionary score. I loved Alan's score, and who doesn't love Elliot Goldenthal? And it was interesting. There was a lesson for me in it. I remember this precisely because I was absolutely convinced Forrest Gump was going to win. So when they called my name, I didn't hear my name, so I just kept sitting there. And then my wife poked me in the ribs and go, "Get up!" So I got up on the stage, and I'm very nervous. And I look out, and I see all these smiling faces, and everybody's applauding, and everybody's going crazy. And it's a great feeling because you might not know this, but Hollywood can be quite a harsh town.
Oh yeah.
And suddenly there are all these producers and all these directors and all these people who've given me a really hard time over the years. And they're all smiling and they're applauding, and they seem to actually think what I did isn't so bad. And so this little voice in my head goes, "Oh, this feels great. If I write that pretty music again, I can do this again." And then this other voice in my head goes, "And there lies ruin." And so So next morning, Crimson Tide meeting with Jerry. Jerry hates everything I wrote. I have such a hangover, but back to reality, and working with Tony, who was just all about revolution and can you make it weirder and can you be more provocative, etc. So it was the opposite to writing pretty music.
Crimson Tide's an incredible score. Sometimes when I listen to Crimson Tide, because I love that movie and I love that score, it's funny because I hear themes and elements. Great composers always evolving, always growing. I hear elements that I feel like maybe morphed and turned into pirates. It's kind of like instead of being Russian swagger, it's a pirate swagger. And do you, as you've grown as a composer, do you, wrong word, steal? But scores that you've influenced, you go, wow, that really worked there. I think I'm going to try this here, but I need to turn this into this. Is there self-plagiarizing of sorts?
Totally. Well, I forget. I'm forever running around going, hey, have a listen to this. Did I use this before, or is this somebody else's? Or, those are the questions, daily questions. Have I written this before? Has somebody else written this before? If I have written this before, is it complete shit? Or question number 4, is it just about presentable? Yeah, of course. It's I keep getting accused of one riff in Pirates being actually in Gladiator, but if you really look at it, it isn't. It's different. But
thank you for bringing up Gladiator, Hans. Thank you for bringing up Gladiator. That was a game changer, I think, for the industry. It was something that we'd never heard before, an epic film. But Lisa Gerrard, I noticed you gave Lisa Gerrard co-composing credit, co-score by on Gladiator. My impression would be she didn't really write the notes for the score, but her influence was so significant. How did you do? Tell me about that.
Well, so it's a somewhat of a lengthy story, but I'll tell you. After I read the script for Gladiator and after I saw what Ridley was shooting, first of all, one of the huge advantages was their cutting rooms was at my studio. We were really, I can't emphasize enough how important collaboration is. And if you can go like with Ben, I was writing in his cutting room. So Ridley and Pietro Scalia, the editor, were cutting at my studio. And I said to Ridley, one of the problems about this movie is there's absolutely no female soul in it. And we talked about this a lot, because it used to be in the script and the way Ridley shot it, it was titled Gladiator, straight into the battle. And so we talked about this, that we could do more, something more. We needed something more. And wouldn't it be great to have a female soul in this thing? And Pietro, I remember he had 3 CDs on his little desk. He pulls out the first one, and it's Dead Can Dance. He goes, "What about Lisa Gerrard?" And I look at each other. And we go, "Yeah, that'll work." So Ridley said, "Give her a ring." So I gave her a ring in Australia, and I'm going, "Well, I'm working on this Ridley Scott movie." And I mean, would you be interested? She goes, "Yeah, great. Who's in it?" I'm going, "Russell Crowe." And she goes, "Oh, no, I can't do that." I'm going, "What do you mean you can't?" "No, I just can't do that." So I go back into the cutting room and I say to Ridley, she just turned us down. And he goes, "Really? Let's send her the movie." And I mean, this is something you guys, you could never do this in this, or you could, but you'd go to movie prison forever. We sent a person that we didn't know the movie in Australia. And she looked at it and she phoned me back and said, "Yeah, of course I'll come and do it." And she was supposed to come for 3 days and she stayed for 3 months. And she became sort of our muse, and
you can tell.
And our producer was Steven Spielberg. So, it's like you listen to a producer when he's Steven Spielberg, and he thought I was crazy to give her that credit, but I said, she is our muse. I want her to be acknowledged. I want, she was there every day. She was, she influences. I might have been writing those notes,
but she made the sound. Yeah, she influenced the sound.
So, and what difference does it make to me? Be generous. Give people credit.
You've always been generous. Because we only have 5 minutes left, I want to cover 2 last things.
In 1990 or something.
I know. Well, forget it. I threw out the dates. The whole timeline thing didn't work. Chris Nolan.
Another guy. Never heard of him either.
Another multi-picture relationship. Obviously, a friend. What is it that makes Chris Nolan so special and kind of peaking with Inception of sorts? Another defining score.
He's smart, and he lets me do whatever I want to do. It's like he respects my point of view, and he has and he keeps me on my toes. I'm not doing his newest movie. Sometimes you have to take a break. Well, sometimes timing just doesn't work out as well. Plus I'm a big Ludwig Göransson fan, so this is all working out rather well. But the thing with Chris is, we've supported our strangest ideas really well. I remember sitting on, getting a phone call from Chris going, "Hey, do you want to?" Because we live so close to each other. "Hey, do you want to take the kids to the beach?" So we're going to the beach, with the kids, and Chris starts to talk to me about Inception, and the idea of these layers of dreams and time. It's really a time travel movie. And how can we present this to an audience without them getting completely and utterly lost? And me going, it's hard for you, but it's really easy for me, because that's what music is all about. We divide time. You have a bar and you divide it into 4 beats, and you divide the 4 beats into 8, subdivisions, etc. So you do these layers all the time anyway. So we could talk about things in those respects, and I would write. Another thing, Inception. We were both in London at some party for some film opening and we're not good at parties. So we're, of course, in a corner talking about ideas. And it was literally like, what day is it today? Oh, Tuesday. Hang on, let's get a brass section in on Thursday and just experiment with them.
The brass on that movie is stunning. I pity the foolish music editor that tempts Inception in any movie.
Well, here's the thing, and I think it's sort of an important point. It was a story point in Inception, and then every trailer basically used it as a device, but it wasn't a story device anymore. It was just a way of flipping the pages, And for us, it was very strongly and very meaningfully a story device. So
one of the all-time great
misused, but who cares?
One of the all-time great scores, though, Hans, honestly. And then I guess we'll finish up with, because we only have a couple of minutes left, the Lion King live action. How often does a composer get a chance to re-record their Academy Award-winning score for a live action version of an anime? What was important to you about?
Hold on a second. The original Lion King. Let us just be honest for a moment. When we started working on Lion King, nobody wanted to work on Lion King. I remember the call went out to the animators. Who wants to work on Pocahontas and who wants to work on Lion King? They all wanted to work on Pocahontas. My music budget allowed for about 3 violins and a tin drum. It was a bit of a fixer-upper opportunity. Forget the Oscar thing, and I felt there was a way, because I'd worked a lot in, obviously, World Apart was a movie about anti-apartheid. I've done a couple of others about the similar subjects. I had done 12 Years a Slave by that point, etc. So I wanted to bring this home in a funny way. I wanted to reinvent the orchestra, and this gave me a chance to not only reinvent the orchestra by having my band, who I tour with in there, who are completely multicultural, but to find this and torture you by saying to you, I want to bring this orchestra and I want to supplement the LA players with this amazing orchestra of Black musicians, the finest musicians I've ever heard, called the Recollective Orchestra. And I know you trusted me, but I think, so this is now where I'm turning the tables on our conversation. So when you came in and you heard them play for the first time, I'm leading my witness here, I know, but it was special, don't you think?
It was special audibly, and because it was spectacular, but I have to tell you, it took my breath away. I've never looked out into one of those big studios and seen an orchestra that had a cosmetic makeup that was truly diverse, indicative, and representative of the world that we live in. It's the most beautiful setting I have ever seen to this day. And so, in that respect, it was so accomplished in so many ways, especially given the world that we're living in now, what we're all committed to doing and trying to do, to look out there and see those beautiful faces and that mixed culture and ethnicity of people was so fitting for you, for the fulfillment of the generosity that you have in your heart and soul, and for this movie that started this all, and why you're being honored today. So thank you so much. I see Sarah's back. Thank you for the privilege of doing this. I wish we had another hour.